Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. This is Shane with Shane Media. In this video, we're going to discuss Gone in the Night. Let's get into it. Gone in the Night is a 2022 film starring Winona Ryder, Dermot Mulroney, and is directed by Eli Horowitz. So the opening of this movie gave me strong Barbarian vibes, to the point that I actually thought maybe this movie ripped the opening of Barbarian off, but I looked at the release dates and this movie was actually released a couple months before Barbarian. Barbarian was released in September, I believe, and this movie was released in July. So yeah, if you're going by release dates, this movie actually did it first. But the opening is where the Barbarian similarities end. This movie goes in a completely different direction. Now, whether or not that's a good direction is entirely up for interpretation. So I have actually seen this movie twice now. I watched it the first time just scrolling through Hulu trying to find something to watch, and the second time in preparation for this review. Because when I watched it the first time, I was like, hey, you know what? This is a pretty good movie. I think it's not a masterpiece or anything, but I think it'll be a fun little movie to talk about. But then I watched it the second time to prepare for this review, and I seen a lot more problems with it. In fact, I'd even say this time the bad things outweighed the good things, and that's a bummer because I think this movie did have a lot of potential. In fact, I think that's what I seen the first time I watched it. I was able to see the potential this movie had, and I was grading it off of that instead of grading it off of what it actually achieved. But I'll get into my problems with this movie here in a second. But first, I want to talk about the things this movie did right, in my opinion, of course. And the first major thing they did right was the casting. I always enjoy seeing Winona Ryder. And I mean, outside of Stranger Things, we haven't seen her in a whole heck of a lot in the last 20 years. But I love her presence on screen anytime she's in a film or TV show. I mean, she's one of my favorite parts of Stranger Things. I loved her in all of the stuff she did in the 80s and 90s. I mean, I love just about everything this woman does. She is a phenomenal actress. So obviously, every time she's on screen, I'm totally digging it. And then we have Dermot Mulroney. And while he never reached the level of stardom that Winona Ryder did, those of us who know who he is like him and enjoy seeing him pop up anytime we see him in a movie. He nails just about every role he does, even if the movie around him isn't quite up to par. He's proven to be a pretty solid actor. I'm even looking forward to seeing him in Scream 6. That's actually one of the things I'm looking forward to seeing the most. I'm interested to see how they are going to utilize him in the upcoming and expanded Scream lore and what he brings to the Scream universe. And everyone else in this movie I'm really not that familiar with, but I think they all did pretty okay jobs for what they were given. I mean, there was nobody who was egregious or just totally unbearable to watch. So, I mean, that's always a plus anytime you aren't just completely disgusted with the actors on the screen. But my next and unfortunately final positive for this movie is the overall premise. Like I said, I think this movie had a lot of potential, and despite not enjoying it nearly as much on my second viewing, I was still able to see all that potential. I was still pretty invested in the story trying to be told, and I was invested in the journey of our main character, Kath, played by Winona Ryder. I think this movie had a good foundation to build from, and in the hands of a different filmmaker, maybe the execution of this movie could have been more spot on, and we would be seeing more people talk about this movie. Because prior to stumbling across it by accident on Hulu, I hadn't seen any buzz about this movie, and I really feel like that's a shame because when you have Winona Ryder in a movie, her screen presence demands attention. But this was an undercooked script, and her character wasn't utilized to her full potential like the rest of the movie. So she was just completely wasted on this movie. And honestly, the trailer for this movie was far better than the movie itself. It gave the skeleton for what this movie could be. Which moves me right into my negatives. This movie is a slow burn done wrong. Slow burns are supposed to be effective in world building and suspense building in the first two acts with a great payoff at the end if it's done correctly. This movie does a pretty decent job at building the suspense in the first few minutes of the film, but then it flatlines, and it just never really gets back to that. I don't need a story in a movie just spelled out for me. I love movies that give you all the breadcrumbs throughout the movie and trust the audience to be smart enough to form their own conclusions. That's good storytelling. You trust your audience to be smart and figure things out. But this movie didn't do that at all, actually. Some parts of this story were just made way too obvious, and other parts weren't explained nearly enough. There's a part of this movie involving Dermot Mulroney's character that is very integral to the overall plot of this movie. In fact, you could argue it's the driving force of this movie, but it makes absolutely no sense, and there is absolutely no explanation to it at all. You can tell it's trying to appear like a more intelligent film than it actually is, but in reality, it's just lazy storytelling disguised as smart storytelling. Like I said, ambiguous storytelling is good as long as you leave all the puzzle pieces there for your audience to put it all together, but this movie leaves no breadcrumbs or puzzle pieces whatsoever, and then just gives you an exposition dump at the end with absolutely no context that makes zero sense, and it's just lazy writing. This movie tries to do the Quentin Tarantino thing where it toggles back and forth between past and present events, and by the time you get to the final reveal, it just all seemed kind of useless. It just felt like filler, and not good filler. None of it brought any value to the story whatsoever. It was just there trying to give context to a half-baked story. I think there was a good movie in here somewhere, and you could probably take the best parts of this script and put it in the hands of a more competent filmmaker, and I think we would have had something great, but unfortunately, that's not what we got. So for a rating, guys, I'm going to give this movie a 5. But that's it for this one, guys. Go ahead and like and share this video, and if you haven't already, please subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.